Welcome to Intentionally Blank, where we're not signing things. Today we actually are going to be doing something very cool. We have special guests, and we're gonna bring them out, and this is gonna be split into 3 episodes, but we're gonna run them just all as one big conversation. But you'll see us kind of breaking a little bit as we do different topics. But let's introduce our guests. We have Matt Dinniman, who is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and we have Robin Hobb. Yes. The wonderful, I hope she doesn't mind me calling her the grandmother of all fantasy authors. Oh, we have Matt here. Matt, thank you so much. Welcome, take a seat. And we have Robin. Yay! Yay, Robin. Robin is one of the first pros that I met in the industry when I was first breaking in, and she adopted me. And I hear this is very common. She takes care of everybody. But I would come through town and she'd be like, let's go out to dinner. Let's talk about how things are going. You might notice that she cover blurbed Mistborn for me. One of my very, very first blurbs that I ever got, and a real boost to my career right at the start. So, and a fantastic author. I have never read a book by Robin that I haven't loved.
Oh, thank you.
And constantly reinventing the fantasy genre. Dungeon Crawler Carl, Matt Dinniman here, fantastic author. I have not read his book yet.
That's okay.
I know. I will get to it. I've been told it's so great. But I did go download it and buy it.
Wow.
And yes, and I started it, I just didn't get time. I had to finish Fondalise, and then she's not on the panel with me, but I'm so excited to have you here.
Very happy to be here.
You kind of represent a part of fantasy that's happening right now. We're seeing a lot more of this sort of, I use the word postmodern wrong, but it's a little more of this, not kind of self-referential, but not quite fantasy. It's a whole big part of the genre right now that's really exciting and interesting that people are doing. So I really like seeing that, and I like having you on the panel for that reason.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're lit RPG, right?
It is lit RPG.
Yep.
Yeah, I have always wanted to write that, and every time I say, I want to write this, but I don't know how, you are the one people recommend to mimic. So I'm going to be shamelessly plagiarizing you at some point in the future.
I can't wait.
So we have a fantasy quorum here. I warned them about this. I do this sometimes. So when I get fantasy authors together, we convene a fantasy quorum and make decisions about the future and the present of the fantasy genre. And I have a list of very important, very serious questions that I'm going to ask the panelists. Some of them might actually be kind of serious. Most of them will not be. And so I'm going to start us with, what crime do you think Grandpa Tolkien needs to answer for the most?
Who's going first?
You look like you got something, Matt.
He has stolen all of the words.
He knows all the best words, doesn't he? It's really unfair of him to be so good at languages and to be the first epic fantasy, and then we're all expected to somehow live up to that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, and they said, well, if you want to be a writer, you should read Tolkien. And I picked up Lord of the Rings before The Hobbit because I didn't know. And I was, how am I ever going to write anything like this?
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah, exactly.
It crushed me.
Mm-hmm.
It's so utterly unfair because I talk about, a lot of what you try to do with prose is you try to make it clear, and it's not that you do want it to be complicated and complex, but you also want it to be a window through which you see the story. And some prose is also kind of flowery and beautiful unto itself, and Tolkien did both. It's very clear and it's very flowery, and it's utterly unfair that he was able to do that. That's the sin I want him to answer for. He set the expectations very, very high for the rest of us.
He also created the expectation that we're all going to write trilogies.
Yes, oh yeah, oh yeah.
It's a good one.
And he wrote 6 books and then pretended it was a trilogy.
Yeah.
So what?
He cheated,
How
and
is
then
that
the rest
fair?
of us.
And we're left with that now.
Yeah, I actually remember reading an interview with an author from the early 80s that I used to follow, and they had a book series that they were working on, and the publisher's like, no, you've got to make it a trilogy instead of, there was like a 5-book thing that they're like, nope, trilogy, it's got to be a trilogy. Trilogies are what people want. Yeah, Tolkien. Dan, you got any sins that Tolkien needs to answer for?
Yeah, he's got, names like Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and there's Eowyn, and there's Sam. And it's like, come on, man. You had one more good name in you.
Oh, do you know that that's not Sam's real name?
I do know that that's not his real name.
That was his
I can't
translation.
remember
It's
what.
like Vazdur or something like that.
Yeah, all the hobbits have actual little hobbit names that
And
are
he
different.
put them in, he anglicized them for audiences. But it is kind of funny. There's a meme online that you can see once in a while. It's like, here, how hobbits name their children. Like, here is my daughter, Daffodil. My other daughter, Glory Light. And here is my son, Pondwater. And Durpo, right? And it's like, yeah. All right, next question. A little more serious. But still a little tongue-in-cheek. We're seeing a lot more fantasy adaptations happen. I see a lot of discussion about this online. Should the default for a fantasy adaptation be animated, with the live action being the exception, as opposed to the other way around, which is what it seems like it is? We haven't seen War of the Rohirrim yet, and that's gonna really, I hope, kind of influence people's perspectives on this. I hope it's gonna be amazing, and so therefore, maybe we'll be able to get away with more animated.
That is a very dangerous thing for me to answer for a reason I can't say.
Okay. Oh, I'm gonna get you in trouble. I'm gonna highlight this, bookmark this thing, show it all around Hollywood. Matt's getting himself in trouble.
I mean, it would be awesome to see live action stuff, but the truth is, with shows like Arcane and Invincible selling out, being some of the top-rated shows, animation is really having their day. And who here saw Scavenger's Reign? It got canceled, unfortunately, but it was one of the most amazing experiences of anything I've watched. And animation is, as an art form, is getting more and more respected. And I would like, I'd like for it to be open up so much. There's so many great novels, sci-fi and fantasy novels, that I love that simply haven't been adapted because they thought that animation was, too childlike or too cheesy. And now finally we can start seeing things like that. And I'm really looking forward to it. So
Yeah.
if I would love to see more animated adaptations.
I mean, Robin, I have graphic novels of some of your books,
Yes.
and things like that. Obviously, you've explored kind of that illustrated version. What do you think about animated versus live action for fantasy in particular?
I'm thinking about budget.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, Lord of the Rings, we had that army coming over the hill. But if you're considering a budget with ships, for example, or things like that, animation is going to be able to handle that better. The danger I would bring up, it would be AI.
Yeah.
Slipping into animation. So
Yeah, we gotta keep an eye on that.
Yes.
And animation, as we found with Arcane, sometimes is not cheaper than live action.
Right.
We spent a lot of money on that, and it shows with how fantastic it is. Dan, what do you think?
Oh, the tricky part of your question is, should it become the expectation for it to be
Yes,
animated?
should that be
We'd
the
all
default?
love to see more animated stuff. Should it be the expectation? I don't know. I have to say no, it shouldn't be, until, like Matt said, animation becomes as respected. It is 100% respectable, but that doesn't mean people are respecting it the way that they should. I remember having very similar conversations back when Princess Mononoke was in theaters 20 years ago. And everyone's like, oh, good, now finally people will realize animation is for adults too. And they didn't then, and they might still not now. Once that bias is overcome, then sure, I wouldn't mind that to become a really common thing.
All right, next question, a little more on this, the silly side. Should fantasy authors have the right to knight people?
Did you say knight or knife?
Knight.
I was hoping for knife.
I know
Yes to
what
both.
that end of the stage would prefer, because Dan would be on your side. It's knife people. Isn't it, I go back and forth on knighthoods for, Americans. We were like all about, no, we do not want a king. But then we don't get to have knights either. It makes me feel kind of sad. So I wonder if maybe the fantasy author should go around knighting people.
The thing is, I already have the ability to knight people.
Oh, do you?
I do.
Yeah?
It's just you have to care about what I do. Any of us can knight someone just as easily as the queen can knight someone. It's just that she has an organization behind her that people have attributed some authority to in their heads. And if we pretend that we all can do the same thing, then we can, because it's all made up anyway.
All right, so what Dan's saying, if you want to be knighted, you have to convince him that you're worthy of it, and he'll knight you.
Let's talk. I can't
make you
just
jump
throw
through
these
hoops.
around to anyone. Okay, then.
All right, serious question. So I noticed while I was writing silly questions that the word fantasy has the word fan in it. And I realized I've never really kind of had a big conversation with fantasy authors about the nature of fandom and fantasy. And what's bringing me here is, like, I have a book coming out, came out today, right? Well, thank you. And it's very likely to, top the bestseller charts and things like that. But it will only do so for 1 week and that's totally fine. Don't get me wrong. I am not complaining. I'm really happy by that. But it's really fun. Like, I feel like as a fantasy author, I can punch above my weight class for 1 week. Like, I can come out and I can outsell any of the bestsellers for 1 week. I can take it, like, I once beat Dan Brown, I once beat John Grisham for 1 week. Because in fantasy, we have such powerful fandoms that people will go out and support the book. But they'll all go out and support the book the first week. And so you get to do very well because of that. But then, then you step back and be like, all right, Stephen King, you can go have the rest of the weeks and things like that. But that's actually really awesome. I always say when people recognize me and someone nearby is like, who is he? And I'm like, I'm very famous with a very small group of people.
Big fish in a little pond.
Exactly.
But you need to strategize. All you have to do is say to everybody here, readers A through O, you buy this week. And you could be on there for 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
I'm sure.
There we go. Yeah.
Or just talk to Amazon and say refuse all orders unless the last name starts.
Oh, I'm sure they would love me. They would really love that. I wouldn't get any complaints about that at all.
No.
But no, let's talk about this idea, of us being able to, I feel my career exists because of fans. And I feel like in fantasy and science fiction we do. And in other genres, they exist because of readers, but not necessarily because of fans always. Like an airport book, it's just like, this is the book that everybody's reading. They pick up and read it, and no one's going to complain about that. But we have this special relationship, I feel like, with the fans. What's your perspective on that? How has it influenced your career and your interactions with your community?
One of the things I have noticed is that publishers have brought out special editions of my books over and over, and I keep saying, I think you've run this into the ground, but they seem to do well, and that is 100% based on readership.
Yeah.
So it's had a huge influence. Mm-hmm. So when I was signing today, I was seeing a lot of special editions, and that's definitely the readership.
Yeah, well, and that gives us something in our community that's a little bit like how musicians can go perform because the royalties are still good for books, but we've had several scares where we felt like they were going to plummet, and royalties for musicians have basically evaporated. But they have this other thing. The special editions are really a nice way that we are able to have kind of a nicer thing that people want to put on their shelves. That's really handy for making us able to make a living. So,
and the fans will buy them. They've already read your book, but they want the special edition. They want it on the shelf. Mystery might outsell us in the end, but there's not huge groups. There are fan groups, but they don't have groups where they just talk about the novel. Fantasy, especially fantasy series, lend themselves to people wanting to talk to other fans. A lot of mystery fans don't necessarily want to talk to each other. They just want to read the book and solve the mystery. When you create a fandom, when all the people are here and they're becoming friends with the people that they're sitting next to, and they have a mutual joy, and it's questions about your book. They haven't, there's mysteries still to be solved. There's still things to talk about, and that is the magic in fantasy, and it's the magic in fantasy fandom, and that's why series work so well, is because we love to, do what ifs. What if this happened? What if this character met this character, and you don't see that so much in other genres. And it's true. My series, I don't have any advertising for it other than a few bucks a month on Amazon. Everything I've sold has all been word of mouth, and it's all been fans.
I mean, and that's how my career was made, the same way, right? Like, you would think being with a big New York publisher, they would spend some money on advertising. They do now because, but when I was starting, it's just like people picked up the book, they told other people. The best advertisement I probably got was Robin Hobb on the cover of Mistborn. But yeah, totally. Dan, any thoughts on this? You want me to?
I'm wondering how much of this comes down to saturation of market. You talk about genres like romance or mystery or thriller. People are reading, one, sometimes 2 or 3 books a week in those genres. And in fantasy, I don't see that as much. People definitely read very quickly. Raise your hand if you've already finished Wind and Truth that you got last night. Nobody yet?
Not too many of you.
Okay.
I'm glad you listened to me.
But you've probably read a lot of it. People read very quickly. And so this kind of loyalty and obsession and dedication that we see in fantasy, I wonder if other genres don't see that so much because they don't have time to obsess over this one thriller that they read and love, because they have read 7 thrillers since that one. I also wonder if it might come down to just, and I just tapped my microphone, sorry audio guy, if it comes down to the transportation to another world. Like if I read a mystery or a thriller, it's awesome and I love them and I read those a lot, but it's not going to take me away somewhere. It's not going to give me a character I can cosplay that looks very different and has white eyebrows and things like that. I don't know. That's what's going through my mind as you all talk about this.
All right, next question, a little more on the silly side. Have you ever been annoyed that it's called fantasy? Let me give you the reason for this. I was once at a young adult convention where I was the only author of adult fiction they had, and they announced me as the adult fantasy man. And
that's always how I thought it, so that works really well.
And then they're like, that does sound very odd when we say it. Anyway, come out, Brandon. So if I could go back in time, I might try to change the name of this genre from fantasy to something else because so that I would not be embarrassed that time when I had to step on stage.
What would it be though? Like,
yeah. I don't know. There was that whole fantastifiction thing that was it Gernsback who wanted it to be fantastifiction, which is so hard to say. So I'm not surprised.
Fantastical.
Wasn't Harlan Ellison speculative fiction?
Yes.
Because he didn't want to be identified as a purely science fiction writer.
Yeah.
Speculative fiction.
Mm-hmm. You ever been introduced as like, and here's our fantasy author, and then think, fantasy, yeah. Anyway.
No, but I did have trouble. I was the guest of honor at the World Horror Association one year, and I said it too quickly and told my mother-in-law that I was a guest of honor at the World Horror Association. So you gotta be careful.
Yes.
All right, more serious now. So trends in fantasy. So I think this is actually a really good one for this panel because Robin, I always feel like you are doing something that's kind of on the, like you're often reinventing. We had live ship traders right when like people were getting tired of this sort of same old settings. We had the kind of first person narrative fantasy novel with these cool little interlude kind of interstitials before Name of the Wind was doing it. We always have you doing something like even the kind of later Fitz and Fool books, they were kind of almost cozies before cozy came about. They're like daily life sort of things are a big part of these and how to live with, a life and a family as in this fantasy world and things like this. Like we've got all of this cool like trend setting, and then of course lit RPG. Like this is one of the exciting places fantasy has been going lately. I believe it started in Japan, if I'm right. And is this true? You will know way more than I will. But really has been like it's one of the cool new things. Trends in fantasy. How have you seen trends changing lately? What are your perspectives on the trends that you've been part of?
Well, it has been changing. Even when I wrote my first lit RPG novel in 2017, it was way different then. The demographic was very, very focused. It was because nobody had heard of it then. And the people who read it only wanted to read the stats. They're like, why is there so much dialogue? I didn't read any of the dialogue and your book didn't make any sense. Seriously.
Wow.
But as we grow and people realize that these are actual books, actual novels, we're getting more and more readers who have said, this is the first book I've ever read since high school, since I was forced to read a book. And I think that particular aspect of lit RPG, it's like the Twitch thing. You ask yourself, why does somebody want to watch somebody else play a video game for hours and hours and hours? And it's the same sort of people that watch Twitch gamers are reading things like lit RPG, which is like when you're reading it, it's like you're watching someone play a video game. And we're getting so many new writers, and there's so many more elements of sci-fi and fantasy mix. And at the same time, lit RPG is 99% indie published. And in the past few years, indie publishers have come out of nowhere. The romance authors in the indie space are making significantly more money than anyone even thought possible. And when those two things happen at the same time, you see all sorts of weird stuff, and that's what's so amazing to me. I read a book the other day when it went back and forth between third-person narrative and first-person narrative like this, and I can't remember ever seeing anything like that. Little simple things, and you don't think they're going to work, and it's an experimental because it's an indie-published book. And those trends, all of them coming together to form like such unique stories that would never get picked up by a traditional publisher because it's so risky, but they end up breaking out. And that's what I like about where we are right now.
Yeah, publishing has this push and pull because it's the innovation that drives the trends that become tomorrow's bestsellers. But those things are so scary to the publishers because so many of them can be a risk, like you said. And so the publishers tend to be a little more conservative on this and publish what has been popular yesterday, which means that they generally have accidental hits or they play catch up. And the indie space has really been a place where a lot of this innovation has been happening over the last 15 years.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely true.
Let me ask you a question before we get to Robin. Does Free Guy count as a lit RPG?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it does. It's at the very least, it's game lit, which is kind of like the round circle, the genre circle above it. But I consider it a lit RPG
because it doesn't feel
There's
like
stats.
it has exactly the tropes, right? But I wonder. So you would say there's a game lit super bubble.
He's an NPC. He has stats. He has a thing he can see. I would consider it lit.
Okay, lit RPG. Great. Raman, do you want to talk anything? You've been able to see lots of trends come and go.
We're going to do a lot of novellas.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go on a word diet. You know that? Yeah. And I think we're going to see a lot of novellas coming out, and they're going to be interconnected. But I think people want a smaller bite of story at a time. simply because of what our phones are doing to us.
Okay.
And the Sesame Street generations have grown up, and we want a 5-minute entertainment, and that's the phone. But I also think we're going to see a lot more novellas
Okay. Yeah.
succeeding in the field.
And the web serial space has exploded
Yes,
for the
it
same
has.
reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're doing it a
Exactly.
chapter at a time. My Patreon does fairly well, and I post my book a chapter at a time.
Yeah. And that's a very weird thing because you end up with things like Worm, which are like enormous, but were released in little bite-sized chunks. And so.
And I don't know how many million words Wandering is right now.
Yeah, Wandering In's another really good example of that. Yeah. Dan, any thoughts on trends?
No, I know nothing about trends.
Yeah.
I'd be a lot more successful if I did.
All right, we got just a few minutes left, so let's see what else. Here's a more silly one. Are all genres and books secretly fantasy?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I really think they kind of are, right? Like,
It's fantasy, and then underneath it are all the aspects of fiction, because fiction never happened. It's all a fantasy. So fantasy is actually the umbrella. We're not a genre within fiction. Fiction's a genre within fantasy. And I'll stick to that.
I'm there with you.
Well, and I think that you could extend that further. I think that that's brilliant, and a lot of nonfiction is frankly fantasy as well, because
that.
they lionize certain characters or certain ideals. They want to make a statement. They tweak the details. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, if we have time for this one,
All
good.
of Twitter is fantasy.
Yeah, Twitter's
Sorry.
Twitter's very angry fantasy right now.
best unadapted fantasy, in your opinion, that's not your own, that you wish would get an adaptation? And that's a big question. So if you can't off the tip of your tongue come up with one, it's totally fine.
Robin McKinley, Blue Sword.
Okay, Blue Sword.
Oh, yeah.
My wife would agree with you. We actually have a stained glass window of the Blue Sword in our house. So yes.
Tigana by Guy Gavriel.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
there with you. It's one of my all-time favorites. Yeah, I had dinner with Guy once, and he would not tell me, even me, how much of the Silmarillion he wrote. He is so tight-lipped on that. We cannot pry it. Have you ever been able to?
I've had dinner with
Yeah.
Guy. I didn't. We talked about cribbage. Sorry.
Okay. I've always wanted to know because I feel like Guy might have had the experience I did with Robert Jordan, except with Tolkien, but he's so tight-lipped about it. He won't talk about it. To this day, we don't know how much of the Silmarillion Guy was involved in, just some of it.
Some of it. My answer is obvious for anyone who's heard me talk about fantasy in the last couple of years. Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee.
Yep. Which I can second. I just finished the first one, and it is spectacular. I'd love to see it. Though I'm going to pick Robin Hobb's works and say, I cheated. I said it couldn't be any of your own, but I can pick one of yours. And so I want to see an Assassin's Apprentice adaptation.
We'll see. Maybe someday.
Yeah.